cattails, nannyberries, a Manitoba maple, prickly ash. The leaves are edible. Good afternoon and welcome to Willow's Green Permaculture. In this week's video, I'm going to be showing you and talking to you about all of those food forest species that you can use to feed you basically forever. Because that's the idea of a food forest. It's to be able to have food that's growing that you can simply use naturally, and it comes back every single year. And so that's the ideal thing to do, to be able to create a food forest that's going to grow all the food that you need, and to have to replant as few of those species as possible. Now it's a process, and we're working towards that goal. And for instance, I'm going to be showing you a bunch of fruit trees, and as those fruit trees mature and give us that fruit, I mean, the abundance that gives you is quite something. Fruit trees, nut trees, and so on. And in a food forest, in a permaculture food forest, well, you have all the levels. You have the mature canopy trees, you have the younger trees that are smaller than that, then you have the shrubs, and then you have the herbaceous plants like most of our vegetables, native wildflowers and so on, that are sort of not too high. And then you have the ground cover species, things like strawberries, and you have the vine species like grapes and so on that are going to climb up the trees. And then of course you have the underground species like the tubers, the sunchokes, the potatoes and so on, as well as the mycelia species, all the mushrooms and so on. So we're going to share with you what we have growing here. There was a whole lot to show you. I couldn't fit it all in one video, so this is actually going to be a two-parter, this one, because otherwise the video would have been way more than an hour long, and that would have been way too much. So most of what you're going to see today is the stuff that we have actually in the back, in the forest area. Some of the stuff is in the front as well, and then in the next video it's going to be things that we have mostly around our orchard and our rain garden, sort of surrounding the main garden area. Because that's the thing, a food forest is not just a deep dark forest full of trees. Food forests include all the ecosystems and all those levels that I just described to you, but different ecosystems as well. It includes forests, it includes prairie. Our vegetable gardens, people's vegetable gardens imitate more of a prairie than they do of a forest. You've got riparian ecosystems, rivers and streams and creeks, and then you have everything in between, what we call the edge habitat, which is the edge between a forest and a prairie, the edge between a prairie and a creek or a river, the edge between a forest and a creek and a river, and so on. And it's in those habitats that combine everything that you have the biggest biodiversity. And so that's why it's good to have a garden where you might have water, or close to a forest or a woodland and that kind of thing. Pretty well everything that you're going to see today, none of it was here when we moved in here. Most of what you're going to be seeing in this video, most of what we're going to show you, are plants that either we put in, or because we put the conditions in place to attract the wildlife planted for us. Because most of everything you're going to see today was not here when we moved here. What we had was a dying forest in one part. We had another part which is now forest, which was basically just a flooded wasteland. And then we had a lot of grass, a lot of lawn. So let's get started. Here we are in the Three Sisters demo garden, surrounded by forest. Behind me here are some elderberry. You can see them starting to go to bloom. These elderberry, we actually don't harvest the fruit because we have so many in our rain garden out front. So we leave these fruit for the animals. We might harvest a few of the flowers this year, however, because we haven't done that as of yet. And then over here to the left, we have a whole bunch of dogwood shrubs. You can see the flowers, the form of the flowers are a little bit different. They're a little smaller, and those species are to support the biodiverse wildlife, because there are a whole bunch of different animals that like that like the dogwood, and it's important to support that biodiverse wildlife, to give them the kind of food they like to eat, so that far away from our main garden, so that they leave our main garden alone. But not only that, it's important to support the biodiverse wildlife with a biodiverse amount of plants, because that gives you the balanced, healthy ecosystem. Now there are a whole bunch of plants around me here, but I'm not going to describe them all, because then that would make a several-hour video. So let's go on to the next plant. You can see this vine here. This is called Virgin's Bower. This is another species that we let grow everywhere to support the wildlife, and also because it's absolutely beautiful. It's a type of native clematis. It gives beautiful, beautiful flowers in the summertime, and then the seed heads are also really beautiful. We have this growing everywhere in the forest. Here we have a willow tree, one of the many species that we put in either 2020 or 2021. I believe this was the fall of 2020 we put it in. It was just this big, and even though this isn't necessarily a food species for us, it's native, it supports the wildlife, and this is a medicinal species, because in the young branches and also the leaves, you can, if you have a headache, you can make a tea out of that. It has the same elements in there as you would have in aspirin. I believe, in fact, that aspirin is made from an extract from the willow tree. Not only that, but the willow helps us do our work, because if we're trying to propagate some branch cuttings of a certain tree or plant that's maybe a little bit more difficult to do that, well, you can make sort of like a compost tea out of the young leaves and the young branches, and that will give you a type of hormone in the water that's a rooting hormone, because willow trees very easily root. Also, this is a source for, we can make with branches of the willow, we can make some live fences, some living fences, and hedges and so on. And the willow is also very important for stabilizing the soil if you've got erosion pressures. And so we have a lot of sources of branches here that we can use if we'd like. I've really left this tree alone because it's still very young, but as you can see, it's doing really well. We planted 2 weeping willows like this, and then we have some basket willows out front. This is one of the many Carolinian species that we put in. I put this in bare root in the fall of 2020. This is a Kentucky coffee tree. It is the tree with the largest leaf in, let's say, in temperate North America. You can see the base of the leaf stem here. This is not a branch, this is a leaf stem. This whole thing is a single leaf, what's called a composite leaf. Very beautiful plant. It's not one of our food sources, but it's a plant that supports the wildlife, the Carolinian wildlife that's been coming here more and more in the last few years. Here we are right beside the willow with some cattails. Cattails are a wonderful food species, because when they're young, in the like a little bit earlier in the spring, you can take the young shoots, peel off the outer leaves, and then eat the core. It's juicy and sweet and delicious. Apparently you can also dig it up and eat the root, I think, but I wouldn't do that, because I don't want to dig up my my cattails. Because the thing is, if you simply harvest the base of the plant, then with the roots still there, it's going to be able to put up another one, much like how you harvest asparagus in the spring. Here we have a basswood beside the cattails, and this is a tree, and once again another native tree. The leaves are edible, so if we for some reason were needing some greens and we didn't have any, well, we could eat some of these leaves. Now, I wouldn't harvest from this little basswood, but we've got some much bigger ones in the forest as well. Once again, it's one of the many trees that we put in ourselves. Here is yet another Carolinian species, a tamarack tree. One of the only, if not the only, deciduous pine needle tree in existence. So this tree loses all its needles in the winter and then puts them back up again in the spring. And so in the early spring, they're very, very soft. It's a beautiful tree. It's not one of our food species, but it's one of the many trees that we put in place because it's native and it's going to support the native wildlife. And this one, I mean, these are very young. Once again, we put these in, I believe these were 2021, but this one's already starting to put out some little cones that we could collect for planting new ones. This is another virgin's bower that I chose to show you because it's growing on a dead tree branch that I put in here to support it, because I didn't want the virgin's bower to grow on this tamarack tree here. So I cut a young dead ash tree and I just put it into the ground last year, and I let the virgin's bower grow up it. And so now you'd think that this tree was alive, but it's a virgin's bower that's growing on it. And this is gonna be full of beautiful blooms. Stinging nettle here in the forest. I think I'd rather maybe have it in the forest than in the garden, although we do have some in the garden, but it can tend to be aggressive in the garden. So I've put some of it in the forest as well. Here and here and here and here and all back here, we have sunchokes, also in the forest, on our forest edge, that we put in the forest once again because sunchokes can really spread, and so I don't want to have them in the vegetable garden. So I put them in the forest. These are just starting to come up this year. They're in their second year now, and so at the end of the season in the fall, I'll be able to harvest some of these sunchokes. So here are, at the base of these broccolis, here are some potatoes that I'd like to show you as a food forest species because they come back, especially here, because here we're on top of our chinampa, so this garden does not get watered. It has the water available to it below the chinampa, and so the test here is to see how well these potatoes do without getting watered. They did really well last year, and they're coming back this year. I did add some this year, but there are some old ones coming back too. Of course, these broccoli I transplanted in. So here behind me, here, and everything above and behind me, we have nanny berries. And you can start to see the fruit is starting to form. They form fruit that are maybe about half the size of a crabapple or half the size of a large grape. And they are purple in the fall, sort of blue, a bluish purple. Very delicious. They're native, they support the wildlife, but also I like to eat them as a snack. I find they taste a little bit like a prune. Some people have described the flavor like tamarindo. And what's nice about them is you can make a butter with them rather than a jam. They're nice to make a butter. You need to kind of use a bit of a food processor to do that. But I find them quite delicious. We get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. It was one of the first wild species I noticed when we moved here, but they were tiny and they were being choked out by the non-native and invasive buckthorn. So I started identifying them all. They were only maybe about 3 feet or 4 feet tall, about a meter and a quarter tall. I identified them and I started to cut away all the buckthorn that was strangling them. And now, as you can see how big they are. And we also have literally hundreds of them because the animals plant them for us. Here I'm surrounded by jewelweed. We have thousands and thousands of plants of jewelweed all over. Now, it's not a food species, but it's a medicinal species. I'm also surrounded by mosquitoes right now, and that's just fine because if I get some mosquito bites, I'll just grab some of this, like this, and just take the branch and just rub it together. Rub, 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 rub. And look at my hand. Look at how wet that is. And then I can just rub all that juicy liquid on the sting and on the mosquito bite, and then it won't get itchy. It just washes washes it away. So right beside me here is the trunk of a Manitoba maple. You can't really see the leaves because of all the other trees that are around its base. But this Manitoba maple, most people consider the Manitoba maple a weed, but it produces probably twice as much sap as the sugar maple. And so you can get a lot of maple syrup from it. Now, the sweetness isn't as concentrated as the sugar maple. It might only be about half, but one way or another, whether it's sugar maple or Manitoba maple, when you're boiling it down, it takes a while. So, and the quality of the maple syrup it makes is just as good as the sugar maple. So it's really nice to have, and another reason why the Manitoba maple is so good to have in your food forest is because it's a plant that roots readily if you get branch cuttings from it. And so if you anywhere on, let's say on a piece of land that you're taking care of, if you have any type of erosion problems or unstable soil, the Manitoba maple is one of the best species to stabilize the soil for you. So it's a food species and it's a useful permaculture species. Here's another basswood that has those edible leaves I was telling you about. And here is an oak tree. Oak trees great for supporting wildlife, but also acorns can be processed to make them edible. I haven't researched it enough, but the tannins can be removed in a relatively simple fashion using flowing water in order to make the acorns edible. Walnut, one of the healthiest nuts that you can have is walnut. Here is the prickly ash. You can see all around me there are a whole bunch of them. You can see the branches with the thorns on them. This is a beautiful tree, but it's also a food species. It's a native tree. This tree is in the citrus family. That is right, the same family as the orange, the lemon, the grapefruit, but it is native to here in Ontario in Canada, the only citrus species that's native to Ontario. And actually what's interesting is the fruit it gives is shaped like a tiny little lemon, but it's really, really tiny. And what's interesting about the little red fruit it gives is it's a kind of spicy. This tree is also known as a Szechuan spice or Canadian Szechuan spice because there's a species in China that's similar, that has a similar flavor, but this once again is native to here. And when you taste the fruit, it kind of numbs your tongue. It's a little bit spicy and it numbs your tongue at the same time. So it's just really, really interesting, and some chefs really like to have it. Now, the other wonderful thing about this tree is if you back up a little bit and you look at this tree from a little bit further, you can see that this type of tree you can really shape into a type of a bonsai. And so I've got a couple growing that I started from seed that I plan on shaping into small bonsais. But even this one, which is wild, because it's along our path, I trimmed it a little and it kind of looks a bit like a bonsai. And it's yet another one that supports the wild species. Here is one of my favorite types of trees. This is a sycamore tree, yet another one of the Carolinian species. Quite beautiful. I put this one in 2021, and you can see it's doing really well. It was only about 3 feet tall, or maybe 4 feet tall, 1.20 meters tall, and it's doing really well. It's just one of those species that's going to support the wildlife for us. Here is one of the 3 or 4 different types of ferns that we have on the land here. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ferns, and this one in particular is an ostrich fern. And so the little fiddleheads in the spring are edible. However, to prepare them, you have to boil them in 2 separate boilings of water. Like boil them once, throw the water out, boil them again, throw the water out, and then you're ready to eat them. Beautiful, beautiful plant, and what's wonderful about the ferns is they're a fossil species. These things have been around since before the dinosaurs. Just amazing. And the other thing about ferns is they are a type of species that remediates the soil, and they're an indicator of a healthy ecosystem. I got a lot of mosquito bites in the forest, but I wanted to be able to, I like to be able to, I don't like to hide my face behind a screen, so now I'm just taking some jewelweed and washing all this stuff off, and then we can continue. There we go. Now we got some green mulch. I'm gonna put it in the garden. Here's one wild black cherry. And here's another. I actually put it in the same time, but this one wasn't doing well when there was a lot of flooding here. I'd retransplanted a couple times, but now it's doing really well. Here's a plant I really love. This is a native ground cherry. Now, I've been growing ground cherries for years that I buy seeds for, but when we moved in here, in about the second or third year, we discovered this one, and it was growing through this asphalt right here. The asphalt is still there because I didn't want to break the asphalt and possibly hurt the plant. So all I did was add a bunch of compost and stuff like that around it, and I also added this so that we don't drive on top of it. And so it's native. It comes back every single year. It comes back through the asphalt every year, and the ground cherries that come off of this plant are 2 or 3 times sweeter than the garden variety ground cherry. And what's wonderful is it's spreading now. There's one over here, another one, and there's another one over here, and these ones I don't think are under the asphalt, so I may be able to transplant them. And here's another one here, but this one's growing through the asphalt. So I'm really happy about this. Native ground cherry comes back every year, and what's really interesting about this little corner is this is a tiny little microcosm of a food forest, because we've got a low herbaceous plant here at the base of a tree. And the tree is also part of the food forest because this is a cedar, and cedars are a great source of vitamin C. Let's say for some reason we ran out of food in the winter, or we ran out of vegetables and fruit, I should say, in the winter time, which shouldn't happen anymore, but you never know. Well, cedar is a great source of vitamin C. You shouldn't eat it in huge quantities, but if you needed a bit of a vitamin C supplement, then cedars can provide that for you. And over there under the cedars, strawberries. Hostas. More hostas. More hostas. And some edible daisies. Wild ginger. Pin cherry. Another Kentucky coffee tree, still small. Ironwood. A full-size pear right beside the wild roses, right beside the garden. Wild red raspberries right beside the garden. Gooseberries, also right beside the garden. More grapes, right beside the garden. Gooseberries, grapes, raspberries, roses, and pear. Another walnut. A sugar maple. Right next to the garden. And another sugar maple. Right next to the creek. Evening primrose. We've got hundreds of these everywhere. The root is wonderfully delicious to eat in the fall and in the early spring. The seed pods are also edible, like okra, and the seeds are also edible. You can put those in your smoothies. They're full of omega-3s. Pawpaw. More pawpaw. More pawpaw. This one being shaded by some sage and some evening primrose. Another pin cherry, and behind it, a honey locust. Right beside the orchard. Currants, red currants, these ones. Some black currants. Some more black currants. Some blueberries, still very small. Got a bunch of these. Wild raspberries growing in the woodland area right beside the creek. Make sure there's a lot of vegetation beside the creek to save off any kind of erosion. And a lot of them are food forest species. Plantain, chives. Actually, these are garlic chives, I think. A whole bunch of them in here. Hollyhock. This comes back every 2 years. As in, it gives us flowers every 2 years. Wild oats. Senna. More strawberries. Ground cover that grows just about everywhere. More edible daisies. Just by the kitchen in the back. Marigolds aren't annual, but they're edible and they often self-seed. Violets are also edible and they can be perennial. Lots of herbs. Thyme, sage, lavender, chives, poppies for the poppy seeds for the bread. These are self-sown. Evening primrose. One of several apple trees. They haven't started giving us apples yet, maybe next year. One of several young pear trees. They also haven't given us pears yet, maybe next year. More blackcap raspberries. They're soon going to be ripe. They're going to turn red and then purple-black, and then they're ripe. More cattails, daylilies. They're not native, but they're delicious. They haven't started flowering yet. This is one of the first flower spikes getting started. More oak. Probably our oldest tree. A white pine, a grandmother or grandfather of this piece of land. Tulip tree, great for the wildlife. Another Carolinian species. And another tulip tree here. The deer love the tulip trees. They've been kept pretty small by the deer, but finally the last year or two, the deer have been leaving them alone so they could grow. In here, mixed up with the sorghum. I don't know if you can see it growing up those bamboos. There are some beans, self-seeded. That's never happened in all of my life. I've never had beans survive the winter in the ground. Or even in the winter hanging off of something outside. Some wild gooseberry. A sycamore that I took from a branch cutting last year. It survived the winter. It's gonna grow into a big tree. More pawpaw. Another pawpaw. Some spice bush. More witch hazel. Some lemon balm that I just repotted again. Planted from seed earlier in the spring. That I'm going to surround the beehive with. A little bit of lemon balm at the base of the beehive. Surrounded by some beautiful ever-bearing raspberries. Some lemon balm close to the beehive that's just hidden there in the raspberries. Goji berry hasn't started flowering yet. Rhubarb that I harvested a few days ago. Still left a lot out here. Just wanted to give some more space to these asparagus starts, which are doing really well. And they're surrounded again by these calendula. They're finally starting to flower. Calendula are not perennial, but I like to include them in a food forest video because they self-seed readily and they're so easy to pick the seeds from. More sunflowers planted by the animals. We don't plant sunflowers anymore. Peppermint and oregano in the perimeter of the garden. Western prickly pear, eastern prickly pear, and another western prickly pear. Actually, I think it's called plains prickly pear. These are ink cap mushrooms. You gotta get them when they're young. Otherwise, I don't think they taste very good. Gotta get them when they're real small. This is a lemon tree that I really ignored in the winter. It only stays inside, of course, but it's coming back to life. The leaves can be used to make a lemon flavored tea. We also have lots of aloe. And in the summer, I bring it outside so it can get lots of energy. I hope you enjoyed the video. This was only half of it. The other half's going to come next week. Many more species to show you. A lot of the stuff that we put in bare root and in our first year or two here. A lot of the fruit trees and nut trees and so on. We're going to be able to show you, and a lot of stuff we put in through propagation, etc. We're going to show you the rain garden next week. That's in full swing right now, along with most of the orchard and everything else that surrounds the rain garden and the main garden and the orchard. That's coming next week. So if you liked the video, if you found it useful, if you found it interesting, please share it with your friends. And if you haven't done so yet, then subscribe and support our channel just through subscribing. Don't forget to share any comments you might have. As you know, we really appreciate that, and any questions as well, and we will respond to them or answer your questions. And so have a great week, and we will see you next time.